Okay, we're ready to go. Well, welcome back, everyone that was in the morning session, and welcome aboard for those of you that may have hopped in for the afternoon. Again, we thank the sponsors that were scrolling during the startup of the session, and the IT committee for putting together a fantastic agenda and a lot of content for us to review today. So the afternoon, we've got two key sessions that we'll go through. One is Bob Rittinger, and we're going to talk about the public cloud. So why you should welcome this shift and how to be successful. And he's brought some subject matter experts along with him as well. We'll break, and then we will finish up with a less technical conversation, something a little bit more general and broad on COVID, look back at our previous experiences, and then forward with some best practices in the afternoon. So it's going to be another great session. So let's get started. I am going to turn it over to Bob, who's a director at ValueMomentum. He leads the business development for the Biz Dynamics, which is the on-demand services portion of ValueMomentum. He brings in with us over 25 years of experience in the industry, and he enables carriers and program administrators to achieve revenue growth and high productivity through the use of cloud-based and managed services. Technology's always got to have a value proposition behind it, and Bob brings us a lot of expertise there as well. So have at it, Bob.
Okay.
And oh, one note on the admin side to the panelists. I'm sorry about that, Bob. I just want to remind you all for questions and answers, go ahead. I am moderating the Q&A area, and I'll field those questions over the panelists. So you can just click and type your question in there. And for CE purposes, we do have a couple of PAMIC polls that will pop up just to make sure you're paying attention and properly earning your credits. So make sure if you need credits, you answer those polls. And so then again, turn it back over to Bob.
Great. Thank you, Erin. I hope you're finding all of today's sessions valuable. A big shout out to our larger IT committee that's led by Erin for finding us this set of topics. Thank you. The online only format this year is a change from previous events, but hey, we're all adapting. But the topic for today's session right now is about the cloud. Market data shows that a steady transition of data centers to the cloud. The environment may be managed by a carrier, a core system vendor, or a managed service provider. This session includes a panel who will examine the challenges carriers face in adjusting to this transition and the strategies they're adopting to maximize the outcomes. We will also look at the reasons why carriers should welcome this shift and conclude by discussing how to prepare and position for the cloud. I was going to say, before we start, I'm Bob Rittinger, and I'm the moderator. I'll introduce our panelists now, and we're grateful that they've been able to take time from their busy schedules and participate in the session. The first is Gopi Krishna Gade, and we'll refer to him as GK. And he is ValueMomentum's Chief Technology Officer, and also serves as president of our Biz Dynamics Cloud Business Unit, with responsibility for our platform and platform services. GK has over 25 years of IT experience in designing and developing solutions for customers in the insurance industry. GK has been with ValueMomentum for over 20 years, and leading the product engineering efforts that help ValueMomentum launch rating, product lifecycle management, quoting, and customer engagement solutions. In addition to the business solutions, GK has been involved in building platform and frameworks to help accelerate application development. GK has successfully been running ValueMomentum solutions on the cloud as cloud-based subscription offerings. So it's a SaaS. And Currently, GK is involved in building a managed on-demand cloud operations for ValueMomentum, in addition to delivering new cloud native solutions, including a modern data platform. BJ Gardner is the lead systems architect at Pennsylvania Lumbermens Mutual Insurance. And BJ has been with PLM for 15 years and currently manages the network operations, infrastructure, and help desk operations team for the department. With over 20 years of experience in infrastructure and network operations, BJ brings solid IT skills and experience to his role. BJ's current role consists of data center and capacity planning, cloud infrastructure, end-to-end disaster recovery services, including disaster recovery as a service, licensing and contract management, and purchasing and budgets. BJ's experience spans the industries of education, media, and now insurance. Andy Edwardson is our third panelist, and he is the Senior Vice President of Technology and CIO at Farmers Alliance Mutual Insurance in McPherson, Kansas. He has over 25 years of experience within the P&C insurance space, 24 with Family Farmers Alliance, rather, all within areas of technology and leadership. Current areas of his responsibility include information technology, actuary and data analytics, and enterprise project management office. And before we open up the floor to the panelists, we have just a quick minute on ValueMomentum. I think there's a slide here. We have over 20 years of service to insurers. We're delighted to be one of the sponsors here for today's event. We've served over 100 insurers, and we have 3,000 people, all with insurance experience. It's our real focus. Okay, we offer some cloud. Okay, good. We have our focus is around cloud solutions in a SaaS model. So it's solutions as a service, and helping to engage, acquire, and serve your clients and your partners. We also provide enterprise class services for MGAs, brokers, and carriers. And we always take a customer service approach. But you know, enough for the ad. I think we'll start our panel. And what we'll do is that each one will provide opening remarks, and then I will present a round robin of ultimately two questions to each panelist. And if we have time, we'll open up the session to Q&A. So GK, can you start with your opening remarks?
Yeah, I think it's not really a remark, but some kind of presentation is there. So thank you, Bob. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to start by thanking BJ and Andy for agreeing to be part of this panel discussion and willing to share their experiences on the cloud journeys that they are taking up. So we'll start with sharing our experiences of what we are seeing with our customers and enterprise IT, how they have over the years adopted the cloud, the journey they have taken, what kind of drivers they initiated them to go to the cloud. And also in the end, I'll just summarize with few of the architecture types that we could potentially look at in your journey to cloud. And we believe that cloud as an option is ready and available for everyone wherever they are in their cloud journey. And it's all driven by your business goals, your customer engagement goals, and the digital engagement goals that are there. And you can take your own path in whichever way you want to go. So it's all about the journey, the route that you want to take, or the path you want to take in how you want to fulfill your business needs. So the digital is one driver that is there, and customer engagement is another driver that is there. These are all the drivers that are guiding us in choosing the path that we want to take, depending on business goals. So with that, just to give a quick background, what we are seeing, how customers are evolving or how they are moving in their cloud journey. So in the beginning, it's all about enterprises, all the applications, the network, the operations, everything enterprises were doing within their data centers. They were doing all aspects of how they support the applications. Everything was private, it's on-prem, it's CapEx oriented, where the enterprise IT was upfront, planning about the sizing and scaling, and they were meeting the needs based on certain upfront planning that's being done. Now, from there, the customers moved on, or we have seen that they moved on to these hosted data centers, which are still private, still dedicated to that customer. There's a CapEx model, but certain workloads that are certain capabilities that are typically enterprise were doing, they were offloaded there, obviously because of the broadband networks have stabilized and there is a internet adoption has increased. Some of the workloads started moving out, and primarily the benefit that enterprises were getting were ability to scale. They needed to scale for certain elasticity that was needed, and they wanted operational. They wanted the ability to expand the operational capability, the security and monitoring. Some aspects they were handing off to them. So email and web, these are the kind of applications that moved initially. Later on, it also moved into some non-production, non-critical applications. But still, enterprises were still managing the end-to-end application, the data security, they were all under their ownership. Then there's a big shift that happened with the broadband becoming much more secure, where we had the security was not, concerns were eliminated. So most of these front office workloads started moving out. Now the big change that we have seen in this is, it's not just the workload moving off. Most of these workloads that we have seen as part of this shift were offered as a software as a service. So the providers were, these are all horizontal domain agnostic services, which any of the enterprise could leverage and use it. So for example, all these front office workloads such as CRM, Office, these workloads started moving out, and obviously there is a benefit that enterprises were getting because they didn't have to worry about the operational aspect, the security, the data management, monitoring. These are all some areas that service providers were taking up. That kind of freed up the enterprises in focusing on more focused areas that they need to focus. But at the same time, these service providers also have seen a value where same capability, they were able to scale for a lot of users and customer base, and that there's mutually both sides have benefited. And it also introduced the concept of the subscription-based model, a public cloud as a offering where we are willing to share our data, we're willing to put some data into the cloud, and then we're open for it. That openness started happening. The variable pricing models have come in. So these are all the benefits that have kind of made the shift for these enterprises. And it was a decision that they could make because of also it's also not dealing with the non-production, non-critical applications movement. One big shift that we are seeing in this area today is it's not anymore about the SaaS applications are not anymore about the as applications. They are all about API-based services. So more and more new services that are coming in, the SaaS-based services, they're all about APIs. So for example, earlier when we had to do a communication-based application, new generation application where we want to digitally engage our customers, we had no technology available as a service which you can quickly plug into our application and then provide a capability. So these Twilio, these companies, they're all coming and providing all the capabilities as a service. So we can simply subscribe and then start building capabilities and deliver better value to the customers. So more and more this communication, CAS, and many services that, for example, payment processing or third-party data services. If you look at all of them, they're all very generic SaaS class services, but they're not applications. So that class of application is becoming big now, and that's what we are seeing a lot of customers adopting. And just from the data point, SaaS still is seen as the largest growth market for the cloud, and almost 85% of the companies have some form of a SaaS-based application they're using. Then naturally the shift happened where some of these enterprise applications which are used for running the corporate businesses, the corporate applications, they also started offering these applications as a SaaS offerings. Earlier we used to buy these HR systems and financial systems, and we used to run them, operate in data centers. So those applications were easy. Applications started moving out because these vendors are also started providing them as a cloud-based SaaS service. Obviously, they're providing certain amount of additional ability to configure application for tailorings, all the multi-tenancy aspects have come in, but certainly it was a easy application for them to move out so that the core IT can focus on which is more critical or where they can create better value to the business. So those shifts have happened. And from the data point of view, from Gardner, it says that, I mean, the numbers are high, but still 20 to 50 or close to 100 odd applications are some form of SaaS applications enterprises are smaller to large size are using today. Now, after that, what we have seen is customers, these core systems. So earlier, all the core systems used to be, the customers used to purchase the license of the core system. They used to maintain, they used to administer, they used to manage those applications. That has started shifting because these core system vendors, they started offering the policy and claims and billing applications as a hosted private instances. The difference here is it is still a SaaS model, but fundamentally they're standing up a private instance for each customer so that there's a security and privacy with respect to data, the ownership wise, it's dedicated to them. But still the benefit that our customers have seen is there's a lot of operational security, data management, monitoring, all those aspects have shifted to the vendors, and so they don't have to worry about, they just work on SLAs and they'll ensure that the required governance is there and they're able to quickly jump on and focus their energies in different areas. So that was a big shift that happened. So a lot of these workloads started moving out into these hosted environments. Again, as per Numerica, for portals, rating, policy admins, analytics, these are the areas that are increasingly becoming part of these hosted solutions that we are seeing. And then majority of these core systems, about more than 50% of these, about 35 to 40% of these core systems are becoming part of these hosted offerings that customers are embracing. Slowly they're moving and they're seeing a value in handing off to those service providers. Now, what we have seen is this, all these move again. This diagram is not to indicate that is a sequence in which customers have moved. That's not what we're trying to say here. But it's every customer had their own journey how they landed there. But what these so far all these movement, whether hosted or SaaS, all they did was they increased the operational efficiency. They increased maybe the cost aspects of it, but they still have not able to address the fundamental need of a new generation applications or new needs that are coming in the market. For example, a digital need or changing the customer engagement, providing better value at the edge of your enterprise. How do you make that edge side you're able to consume these services? Those capabilities were still not available with these migration that happened, this shift that happened. So that's where there's infrastructure and platform services have come in. They started offering a lot of these on the cloud capabilities where an IT organization quickly adopt, make it available, quickly launch the new services. So these vendors are also offering more and more of these capabilities as a platform services, infrastructure services, so that an IT organization can start developing or building these new generation applications that the business is demanding. And also the hardware infrastructure scalability and also the software licensing issues. These also drove customers to moving towards the infrastructure and platform services. And the biggest thing is the digital is the key here, because one of the observations that we have is, while in the past, when we started in the beginning in the cloud, everybody said, okay, lift and shift, left more every workload onto the cloud, is economics of scale, all that. It's not the case anymore. We are not seeing many customers going and saying, okay, let's lift and shift everything. There is a game plan. They don't have to move every workload that is there. They can continue to maintain the workload where it is, if it makes sense. But there is a technology that's available through these IaaS and PaaS services where they can open up that value that is there in these core systems as an API, as a microservice, and then create an ecosystem of these digital services through which you can increase the value. So, and then you can probably compose a new service. So that's where a lot of efforts are going on right now, where we see customers investing a lot more in these IaaS and PaaS-based services so that they can build these digital platforms while leveraging all the investments that are there, all the moves that happen to different cloud and hosting services that are there. And few data points, the cloud infrastructure is still growing at more than 40% across all categories, the IaaS, PaaS, database service. Now that is one big move that's happening. Database itself is, we don't have to worry about database servers anymore. It's available as a service based on the consumption, and the business analytics is coming as a service. Another big thing is also the subscription model, pay as you go. So there are a lot of benefits that IT organizations seeing how they can leverage these public cloud to create value within the organization and value to the business. Majority of the customers who do not have moved to cloud, they're considering moving to cloud in the next couple of years. And the immediate workloads that we are seeing where customers are moving are these web apps, the storage, the collaboration solutions, the dev and QA, dev and test environments, DR, identity and access. These are all the workloads that immediately they are moving to get onto the cloud, then which they start expanding into different areas. Infrastructure virtualization is still a big piece of the cloud adoption. Now, what is this all doing? So essentially we have various cloud services that are there, hosted across different cloud providers. Now, biggest challenge that enterprises have is, okay, there are different providers, they're having different operational capabilities, they're providing different SLAs. Now, I have a responsibility of providing SLAs to my organization, my business. So how do I manage all this? How do I orchestrate all this? How do you all bring together? So as your adoption starts growing, that's one area the focus is shifting now to say, okay, now we're getting the value from each of them, but then we need to bring it all together so that we have an integrated experience that we give to our stakeholders and our business. So that's where the two main areas of that integration is happening. One is at the infrastructure level, how do you bring it all together? How do you manage? How do you administer the governance around them? The second is there are these services that are there through multiple cloud of solutions. Now, how do I make them available as a microservice or API? How do I open them up so that I can create this digital platform from which I can compose new business services? What customers are realizing is for a new digital need that is there, you don't have to build everything ground up. You don't have to build applications ground up. There are already value that is there within the enterprise in certain form. We just have to bring it, open it up through technology that is available through these public cloud options and enable it, and then create a digital experience and change the customer engagement. So that's where the thinking and where the discussions are going. Now again, the majority of them, there are a few data points. A lot of customers see themselves being part of adopting a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud environments. About 60% of the customers who are already on the cloud, they think that they will use more than minimum two unique cloud environment they'll have to manage. Only 24% of the customers within 100 million premium do not have anything on the cloud, but they're also moving the direction of the cloud. Customers who already have cloud, they're definitely continuing or they're moving or adopting more. So with this, where are we, right? So what is the current state? So essentially, we know that enterprise IT has choices. They have options to, when they're making decisions about the, based on for the needs. So they have choices to make on the cloud. One or more options are there. They have to pick what works best for them. And they know that a lot of workloads are still on-prem. There is a possibility of moving them or innovating them or re-engineering them, making them available for consumption outside. Executive teams are definitely asking for some kind of a direction, strategic directions so that they can reinvent their business and they serve their customers better. And when IT starts looking deeper into how do they come up with a strategy, cloud is there. You cannot just do that today without thinking about cloud. You can take different approaches, different paths to get there, but it is one of the options, the most critical option that is there for you to create the value or the digital experiences that you want to give to your business. So thinking about enterprise digital platforms, thinking about how to orchestrate these services is key. So something that, again, depending on your journey, you don't have to think today. You may be just beginning. So maybe as you adopt more and more, you might have to consider some of these options in your path. And just a few points, as I was saying earlier, about a perspective of it's not a prescription. We're not saying that you have to do it that way, but you just want to share some thoughts on. You may be from your architecture point of view, you may be in any of these states. You may be on-prem fully. You may have certain SaaS services that are there. You may have some hosted services or a IaaS or a PaaS services. You may be in any of these stages at this point. But depending on what you want to do, what your business scenario is, what your business driver is, you have choices to make. You have options. You can pick and choose which way, what you want to do. You don't have to think about moving what you have today into the cloud. You can continue. If it makes sense, you move. Otherwise, you continue with what it is, but leverage what is there available on the cloud, bring the value. So there is different ways to look at it. You don't have to look at, okay, what do we do with the existing one? Do you have to really move anything? So the point here is, if you really look at from a perspective of, I belong to one of these architecture types, and depending on the need, what do I do to address a particular business scenario? There are choices. So example here is, okay, if a business comes in, there's a need to address a scalability or agility need. We know that there is a IaaS and PaaS services are there which can absolutely meet those needs, where you can do a on-demand cloud bursting is there. You can scale based on the demand. If you have to scale up certain resources, you can bring them down. There's a lot of flexibility that is there in how you look at the problem and then leverage these while you're not disturbing anything that you're already going on. Similarly, if you're adopted cloud and if you have more and more cloud services already in the enterprise, then data becomes a bigger issue, because data is all over. Every cloud service has data collected about your business. Now you need to bring it all together. So you may have to want to look at a modern data platform, which will bring it all together and then provide a value with respect to API. So there are different ways you can look at the problem. Is the data gravity? Where is the data concentrated? There are issues or areas that you need to think through and solve them. Again, there are options that are there in each of these providers, each of these cloud solutions, and then there are techniques available. We just have to pick one, start doing it, and slowly build on it. And two more use cases. Just one more minute on this. At some point, when you adopt more and more cloud services, obviously the managing them with this enterprise digital platform is important. Managing with the cloud managed platforms are important. So those are the areas that you have to look in, depending on where you are with respect to your journey.
GK, we have a question, if you don't mind, on the slide. So I'm just going to read it to you.
Yeah.
One of the challenges to vendors taking on SaaS-like or vendor-hosted directions is they take on the government's regulatory issues by proxy, which some don't fully realize. So the question is, do you believe the industry will shift into a push-button deploy and update back into the customer's public cloud? Or do you feel all vendors will take on the regulatory burdens and charge it back to the carriers? So Randy says, I see several vendors shifting to building the software and are already pushing off aspects like custom integrations to third parties because they realize they don't want to own the customer's journey.
Yeah, so I think the vendors will take a position of, I think vendors will have to support the government regulations as they offer these SaaS services. So I think vendors will adapt to the customer, but the data wise, the vendors will provide a mechanism to make the data available for the customers.
Okay.
Oh, we hope, right?
Great. Thank you, GK. Next, we're asking for opening remarks from BJ from PLM.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, GK, for that presentation. It sets up the content that Andy and I will present very nicely, and so take note of some of the keywords and the buzzwords that GK was talking about, because we'll hit on a couple of those, in our content slides. So just a quick note about Pennsylvania Lumbermens. We're the oldest and largest mutual insurance company dedicated to the wood products and building materials industry. We just celebrated our 125th anniversary this year in 2020, so everyone's excited about that. And just to note, our wood industry expertise, financial stability, and quality products and services are why the business owners and insurance brokers have trusted PLM, with their business over 125 years. So, okay, Bob, or GK, I don't know who's moving the slides, but so, if we shift from GK's content on general cloud kind of, offerings and the different technologies that are out there, I decided to kind of give content surrounding kind of a journey and a timeline, of what PLM's done, over the years. So, I'll start with kind of before cloud, on-prem. So, around 2007 and before, we were pre-virtualization and all bare metal, right? As many of you may have been as well. And we kind of shifted to VMware in 2008, 2009. And if you just see the note there, CapEx data center costs. So we were strictly in a capital expenditure type model at that point. We were all on-prem in our own data center. We had a disaster recovery model of tapes, right? We had backup tapes, and we went to an off-site location to restore the tapes and do our disaster recovery testing. So it was full on-prem, full bare metal. So by 2015, we have a lot of aging hardware. We had the need to expand storage networks. Obviously, everyone goes through the growing pains in your local data center and your on-prem data center as well. So we kind of had a decision to kind of make in what direction to go at that point around that 2015 timeframe. So I just set up kind of before the cloud, and then we'll kind of take a journey into the next slide there, GK. So you see that the heading there, cloud adoption, right? And I have in kind of parens there, a need maybe, right? So, what was going on, we had to figure out if we were going to, spend the money to upgrade hardware, in the on-prem data center. And also, did we want to go that direction? There were so many things coming out at the time. VMware was coming up with different things. A lot of vendors were hitting the market. You had a lot of co-location vendors at the time as well. So we kind of had a particular need. We said, okay, we have a really large on-prem thick client application that's taking up a ton of storage, and that was our imaging platform. So we decided to take kind of a risk, a leap, right? And we talked to some vendors and some co-location type vendors and found a vendor that was kind of playing in the infrastructure or data center as a service model. And I kind of put the little kind of tags in there. You see, the DAAS, and so that kind of flips back to what some of GK's content. So just kind of keep that in mind. So in 2015, after we kind of made the decision to kind of jump in and maybe take a little risk in the cloud, we did decide to spin up a private cloud infrastructure, meaning we had our own kind of virtual area with the vendor. So we had our own vCenter in VMware. And so we were able to migrate some of the on-prem virtual machines into that private data center. So they were providing some data center as a service for us at that time. So that was kind of our first leap there. Around the same time, around the same year, 2015, 2016, we did decide, because of the aging email system we had an old Exchange platform, maintenance was becoming a bear. We decided, since we successfully kind of spun up some of this private cloud type technology, we said, okay, let's throw in our hat to email. We don't want to maintain email anymore. We don't want to maintain the hardware. We don't want to maintain the software, even licensing, right? And that's a completely different conversation. But so we decided to look for a hosted email provider. We didn't do it ourselves. We did some research, and we found a vendor, and it happened to be local to Philadelphia. So we found a vendor that was going to take on our email, and we did a migration from on-prem email to a hosted email provider, an Exchange provider. It wasn't Office, it wasn't Microsoft. It was a provider that had Exchange. They did all the hardware, and they provided the Exchange mailbox, management for us. So that was a SaaS model. That was a software as a service model for us. Around 2016, 2017, we were doing building renovations in our building, in our leased tenant space. and we were consolidating, and we lost a floor. So we lost one of our floors. Well, that floor happened to contain our data center. So we had a big square footage problem. When we were moving up to a single floor in our building, we were losing a ton of footprint in our data center. So you can kind of look ahead as we go to the next slide as to what's going to happen next. So I have a title, Not Looking Back, because we certainly have not. So yes, we lost some footprint and said, what are we going to do? How are we going to keep running what's left and on-prem in Philadelphia? And the answer was, we really could not. So that's kind of a big point in that first bullet there of policy, claims, and billing. They were all in legacy COBOL, and 2016, 2017 wasn't, okay, we pushed it all at once. It was kind of a migration over several years, but I just wanted to kind of lump it together just to save some real estate on the slide. So all of these were running on-prem. They were running in a legacy COBOL environment. At the time, we did have it virtualized, so it was off of its bare metal, but it was still running on-prem. And we had when we moved policy, it was on-prem at the time. We actually moved it off COBOL, but it was still on-prem. We were working with the vendor, and we were still managing it in-house. So when the vendor said, okay, we have a cloud offering at this point, we did go with them, and we moved our on-prem policy to their cloud. So that was another SaaS type model. Claims, we did the same. We moved it off COBOL, and we moved it into a brand new vendor. And again, that was around that 2016, 2017 mark. And billing ended up going with the same policy vendor. So now we have all three of those big things out of our on-prem data center. So in 2017, our email, who had hosted, it was a hosted provider, hosted exchange provider. Well, they were purchased by an Office 365, provider. They're not really a provider, but they manage your Office 365 tenant for you. So I think they call them a cab or something. But so they actually migrated our email from that hosted provider into Office 365. And Office 365 at that point for PLM was kind of born. And I can tell you, we haven't looked back from that moment. And we're building out Office 365 today, and we'll be doing it into the future. We utilize Dynamics 365. We utilize SharePoint. We utilize Teams now, which was Skype in the beginning. So yeah, then that's software as a service. And as discussed in the morning session in the roundtable, we have moved into disaster recovery as a service as well, and that happened in 2018. So as you see, as we kind of went through the timeline, things are moving out of our on-prem data center. We currently operate a little bit on-prem in Philadelphia. We still work with a private cloud provider that gives us a data center in New Jersey, and that same provider is a VMware managed partner. So they provided us a disaster recovery as a service solution into AWS on the VMware platform. And 2020 and in the future, we are, again, I have a little note in there about Azure. So, we have recently kind of started playing in Azure in our tenant. And, now you have, platform as a service as you move into like a SQL managed instance, which is like a completely different type of kind of cloud offering. And so that'll kind of keep going into the future. And like I said, as the slide is titled, not looking back. So, that was a quick little timeline, and I hope I didn't go too far over my allotted time, but that's, PLM's kind of journey to the cloud, and a pretty good kind of take on what GK provided in content into kind of what actually PLM has done in that space. And as you look at, as you look back at his slide content, because he had a ton of great content and not a lot of time to present it. So if you look after the seminar at all of his slides, you can really kind of point back to kind of PLM's journey and all those charts he provided.
We do have a question for you, BJ. Do
Sure.
you feel like the migrations resulted in overall cost and expense savings, or more do you feel the benefit was opportunistic in helping make those systems more manageable?
I think the key takeaway from this, and we'll say it again, I believe later on in this presentation, is not to look at particular cost savings in this type of migration. I think there can be, and you can certainly plan for that in your research, depending on what you're trying to move to the cloud. But in our case, I think it's the latter. I think it was more opportunistic. We had some physical, like we said, footprint restraints in our data center at the time that kind of started the process for us. So yeah, I would say that, at this point, I think the disaster recovery migration, when we went from more colo, private cloud hosted DR to disaster recovery as a service, I believe, like I had stated in the morning session, there was some cost savings there. But at the time when we were going through the contract negotiations and everything for that, that wasn't the driver. Again, more opportunistic because we lost some headcount, so we had a constraint on local resources for running the platform. So, I think cost savings can be a benefit. It's not always the case, though.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you, BJ. And as BJ noted, there will be a link provided afterwards that will you'll be able to review this again. BJ, I may have interrupted you though. I'm sorry.
No, I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
Perfect timing, Bob.
Okay. Then now we'll turn to Andy Edwardson, who has come the furthest for this. Andy is the CIO at Farmers Alliance in McPherson, Kansas. And in addition to all his IT responsibilities, he's also leading an actuarial thrust. So he's juggling a lot of things. But Andy, your turn for some opening remarks.
Okay, well, thanks, Bob, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to participate. To give you a little bit of background about, if you want to go to the next slide, GK. Started out here, I'd give a little background about Farmers Alliance. As Bob mentioned in his opening remarks, we're located in central Kansas, and so we're a regional carrier. We write in 8 plains, what I'll refer to as plains states, and multiple lines. Our premium right now is north of 200 million, and we distribute everything, all of our products and services through an independent agent network. So when Bob and GK and BJ, when we start talking about this presentation, I'm going to approach this a little bit from the perspective of, kind of some of the business drivers behind what we think about today when we contemplate, is there something here that we want to move toward the cloud? And I'm going to, kind of use the same format as BJ did, tell you a little bit about our journey. And, so the point is here that kind of where we are today, we're probably the least cloudy of the 3 of us. So if you want to advance the slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so, going back in time, Farmers Alliance was a historic IBM shop, meaning, we had a mainframe, Z-series mainframe we ran for a lot of years, and a lot of those core applications ran in that environment. And roughly in the 2009 timeframe, what we decided to do was, we had a technology strategy that was aligned with the business strategy, and what we were focused on was really trying to modernize our environment and move things, away from that legacy. In fact, at the time, we had 2 platforms, if you will, that one we referred to as super legacy, technologies, COBOL technologies from way back in the 70s, as well as we had technologies that were a little bit more modern and kind of more of a client-server model, using that that mainframe as the server. So anyway, as we started to transition through this journey of modernizing those core applications and specifically, policy, claims, billing, and then that data component, we ultimately landed in an open architecture, kind of an Intel platform running Linux and Windows applications. One of the drivers that took us that direction was what I would refer to a little bit of, we were seeing lots of sprawl, from the perspective of there were third-party services that our business partners wanted to bring in and leverage, third-party information and things of that. I think very similar to what many of you have gone through. And, a little bit to the point that BJ talked about, we you know, we've traveled those journeys of, you know, virtualizing our environment, but we did not set out to say, you know, we're going to develop a virtualization strategy. It just, you know, things kind of evolved, and that's the point of my what I'm getting at here. This our environment, the data center particularly, you know, it evolved, and a lot of it was, like I say, driven by those core applications, but also a number of services that kind of surround the edge, if you will, you know, kind of the ancillary services that we provide that we're working well through third parties, offered as software as a service, things of that nature. And then there's, you know, we do have a handful of workloads that we've moved out. You know, our HR environment, they're an obvious target that we've moved offsite. We've got collaboration and email, you know, using the Office 365 platform. And then, you know, components of like our security, it seems like there's more of a trend in that direction that we're moving to the cloud. So those are some things that have kind of shaped our, you know, our environment today. Trying to think if there's anything in. So no, I think if you can go on to the next slide. So kind of, you know, back to the point of what are some of the business drivers that help us through the thought process, if you will, around cloud or what we're doing, how we're going to advance technology to ultimately advance business operations. And, you know, one of the key objectives, I've got a couple I'm going to hit on here. One of them is profitable growth, which I think is very common across the industry. And another one is, you know, kind of customer engagement. But going back to that point in time, 2009, 2010, you know, we were very much being encouraged to think strategically, you know, and become an enabler for the business. You know, we're not this cost center that we want to, you know, operate in a sense that, you know, yeah, keep those applications running, but don't think about where they're running or how they're running. You know, focus on what we deliver and try to drive efficiencies into the operation. So, you know, some of the things that, you know, drove those, you know, how that environment we have today ultimately evolved, you know, were things around efficiency and cost of ownership, and then, you know, obviously delivering to our customers. So what we tried to do was provide services to the policyholders and the agents, and many times, you know, we coupled those portals that we have with cloud offerings, software as a service, or something along that lines, like, you know, credit card payment and things that we just felt we are not comfortable with on our own. So let's move those out to a third party. The other, you know, there were other major components there as well, such as print and just, you know, lots of things moving out of our environment, and particularly that data center. So those are some of the things that kind of drove us from trying to focus on profit and growth, you know, making sure we're able to grow the company, but let's do it profitably, and you know, treat the technology group, if you will, as an enabler of that business need. So, okay, can you flip to the next slide, please? Okay, this slide, essentially, I'm just, you know, kind of talking a little bit about the customer, and particularly the agent and policyholder. The agents, likely from a technology perspective, they are our primary customer. You know, a lot of what we do focuses on that agent. So we're trying to, you know, build applications that we can extend to them. And today, you know, most those are hosted on premise. Some of that function that we've been looking at is how can we move those things to an environment that will enhance the agent experience, you know, and you know, part of the goal is to understand what their needs are and how their day-to-day operation goes, so that if we need to bring in some type of service that would add value, that's kind of the goal there. And then the same thing with respect to how we engage policyholders, and we ultimately want to respect that relationship that we have with both of those parties, but, you know, and also maintain the relationship between the agent and the policyholder. So we try to facilitate that as much as possible and continue to push things that direction. So, okay, next slide, please. So on this slide, this is just something that we put together to think about, you know, the direction that the potential targets, if you will, so that we can deliver effectively. And, you know, so one area, like Bob mentioned, you know, that is near and dear to our hearts and that we're working on currently, we've had a long time, you know, BI practice and, if you will, dabbled in analytics, but our goal is to advance that analytics practice. So, you know, building that environment and advancing that practice, we're specifically looking to, you know, the cloud to conquer some of those things. We have a large amount of data on premise. We use a large amount of third-party data, but we want to ultimately, you know, build towards something that will be sustainable long term. A few other areas that we're looking at or that we've transitioned, I mentioned security, and BJ talked a lot about disaster recovery as a service. Those are all targets that we're considering. Today we operate a co-location environment. We've got a facility about 60 miles south of here. And, you know, so operating those two environments, you know, there's cost associated with that. And primarily what we're doing in that location is disaster recovery. So, you know, it's a good opportunity to look at that to understand, you know, how could something like disaster recovery as a service help us. A couple of other areas, obviously the customer sites and mobile and things we've got going on in that area in terms of providing service to the customer. Those are things that we look at with respect to the cloud in the near future. And then we've identified two large areas of work in the next couple of years. One in the financials to replace those core financial systems, and another is kind of in the arena of CRM, you know, to move that customer relationship piece out. So again, I guess the key is that for us that, you know, we're not trying to chase the cloud, if you will. You know, we're trying to do what fits well for Farmers Alliance. We want to be an enabler, a business partner to help advance the business. So as we work through those decisions to understand what will work best for the business, we try to do what fits, you know, and focus on what will move the needle most, if you will. And, you know, always keeping in mind, you know, what we have today and how can we advance that by leveraging something like the cloud. And I think that's about it, Bob. I can see your lips moving, but no doubt.
Little housekeeping. Thank you. Okay, so next, we thought we would move to some questions to the panelists and kind of go from there. And the first question is to GK. GK, what are the data ownership and data transfer challenges we should be aware of when making a decision on cloud adoption?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Hopefully, the earlier question is something that we can probably address with this as well. What we are seeing is with more and more cloud being adopted, the data is getting created at different sources, so wherever the applications are. And as when we deciding an application to move to cloud, when it's adopted, the strategy on what kind of application it is, what data it is being stored, because if it is a SaaS, for example, if it is a SaaS, most of how the data is stored, how data is maintained, the SaaS vendors are controlling. They are providing certain abilities for customers to isolate the data, and depending on their technology. For example, we have this experience with D365 where they're still not there. Suddenly they're providing at the country level. They're trying to isolate the data. We have a scenario where we have both in India and US, we use the same deployment, but regional guidelines are there where countries saying that you need to isolate the data, but the application is the same. So they are providing ability for us to isolate the data and keep it in a particular region. But then within that also, when we are making decisions, it's all about what kind of information you're storing there, and especially with the PI and THI data is there is some amount of strategy is required on how do you store it, how do you encrypt it, how do you protect it. the same time, how do you make it available? How do you have access to that? Because a lot of these providers, they do not necessarily give direct access. There is all egress costs are there. So things that to look into is, as you are signing up with these partners, certainly understanding how they're going to isolate the information, how they are cleaning the security that is needed, and that is from the SaaS kind of applications. But if you get into PaaS application, let's say you're building on a public cloud, a infrastructure, a PaaS-based application, a lot of burden is on us. So when you start building these applications, we are making the choice of the infrastructure, choice of the service that we are choosing, and the providers are providing certain basic foundational tools and encryptions and ability. They're providing multiple ways to manage, but the management is our control. And obviously, it all depends on which service that we pick and where the data, the whole concept of data gravity, which application is holding the primary data. So multiple decisions drive what choices are, how we go about doing it. Definitely some amount of governance is required on understanding. But for example, in one project, when we started the initiative, we put the whole data flow, where the data is flowing and what are the applications that are going to access this data, and how do we ensure that it's protected. And then and then again, if there's multi-cloud, again, the movement of data costs money. So all those aspects play in our decision-making process of the choices and how we go about doing it. So it's a combination of knowing what these SaaS vendors are providing, what kind of capabilities they're providing, along with what we need to do as a development organization as well. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, GK. The next question goes to BJ. How do we start cloud adoption? Is there a recommended approach?
Thanks, Bob. So, that answer is pretty loaded. It definitely depends on your situation. As you can tell from Farmers Alliance and Pennsylvania Lumbermens, we had very different experiences, but some overlap and some the same. So I'll just speak on kind of Pennsylvania Lumbermens kind of journey and experience here. A couple things stood out, right, when I went through our content, and it was maintenance. So we had to do some hardware maintenance that we took a look back and said, are we going to put more CapEx into this, or are we going to move to a cloud, for an OpEx type model? Upgrades. So we were in the need to upgrade Exchange. We needed hardware and we needed the software upgraded. And as everyone, I'm sure on the call knows, it's not easy to move mailboxes. It's not fun. So again, upgrades, we have maintenance, we have vendor systems. We had a vendor that was on-prem for policy, and they came out with their own cloud, adoption model, and we went on it. So that there was another kind of adoption method was the vendor systems themselves may be upgrading or moving to a cloud model. And then we also had, as from PLM's perspective, we had a physical constraint of we did renovations to our building. We lost the floor, we lost footprint in the data center. So that became another path for adoption. So it definitely depends on your situation. I think if you go back to the very, very first presentation we had this morning about surrounding core systems and legacy, to be honest, that's a starting point. If you are completely on-prem, you're still in legacy, you're using iSeries or you're using COBOL, I mean, that right there is a good starting point. Because yes, you can continue on-prem, you can go to a more modern system, you can find a vendor that will host, you can host on-prem, but I think cloud is probably where you're going to want to be as we move into the future. So,
great, thank you, BJ.
Mm-hmm.
And the next question goes to Andy. Andy, how do I leverage investments while moving to the cloud?
Thanks, Bob. That's a really good question. I have the same question, so I'll do my best here to, kind of, a little bit in lines of what BJ was talking about. When we transitioned to modernize our operating environment from the core systems perspective, we did not specifically chase cost or anything like that. So, you know, but one thing that resulted, we got off that Z series mainframe environment and rolled that thing out the door. So, you know, we realized significant benefit there. So today, when we think about, you know, we want to transition some of these pieces to the cloud, and we're mostly a build shop. So, you know, we think about if we've got a core system like policy admin or something along those lines, you know, how could we continue to leverage the investment we've made today while moving that to the cloud? And some of the pieces that we've looked at, you know, specific to this data initiative we have, we look at, you know, what we're doing with regard to, we're going to move a lot of data out here, and there does seem to be, you know, an opportunity to maintain that investment, but then it's all the tools and everything that surround that environment that we have today. If we want to continue to leverage those, the model changes obviously if we move to the cloud, as well as, you know, the skill set we have. You know, we've got people who are, if you will, tooled, you know, to manage these things on premise, and now when we transition that, you know, to the cloud, that model obviously changes. So, you know, those are some of the things we think about in terms of how do we continue to manage that investment or leverage that investment. And that's, you know, and like I say, I have some of the same curiosities about, you know, as we make this journey, how do we, you know, leverage those existing investments.
Bob,
Go ahead, Bob.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Wait, Bob, we do have a question here.
Yeah.
When moving us from Sam Hess, when moving core systems to the cloud, what has the experience been surrounding service availability? Are there best practices regarding availability to keep in mind while considering this transition?
Maybe it's a BJ.
Who wants to take that? You want me to take it? All right. So, yeah, so we do have at PLM some experience in moving core systems to the cloud. You know, PLM's approach to that was always to be able to run parallel. So we did run policy and claims the like parallel while we were doing the migration. And it came up before, I think it was in a poll from the first session regarding kind of, say when we did policy, right, moving new and renewal policies to the system while we ran off, you know, the current policies that were in the legacy system. And same thing with claims. We ran on the COBOL system and did new claims, and, you know, and then upon renewal of the policy, started those new claims at that point in the new system. So I think the key there is definitely to run parallel. I think there is probably a way in a model to do it differently, but for PLM, it was best to run parallel.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another question for GK. Security and compliance is a big requirement in our industry. And with multiple cloud services managed by different providers, how do we ensure that we're protecting the enterprise and customer data?
It goes back to, thanks, Bob. So the data, the earlier question, and then the security kind of related. What we have seen is as each of these, depending on which cloud provider, cloud service that you onboarded, each of them have their own security mechanism, how you integrate with those applications. So usually the security of securing the data at rest, the one that is in transit, the authentication mechanisms that we adopt, in whichever SaaS service that you use, whether it's an application or it is a API-based service. So there are authentication mechanisms that are there. And then separation of customer data is a key thing. So how do they manage it? So all these are all areas that certainly are required to be looked into and make sure that, and there are solutions. Each of these vendors have their own solution. The main challenge that we have seen is when we have to set up that central unified authentication model that is required. That's where the multi-vendors, when you have multiple vendors that are there, each one have their own security model, bringing them together in one unified security model and setting up that authentication framework. Those are the areas that we see a lot of challenges that that customers are seeing how to integrate and bring it together. But when it comes to storing data and maintaining it in a secure way, there are obviously encryption is across the board. Hardware encryption these cloud vendors are providing. So that is something that we should explore, not just the software encryption, because the vulnerabilities can be minimized there. There's also this whole area around as we move to the cloud more and more. Earlier, whatever data we are maintaining in the local desktops, now everything is on OneDrive. Everything we are moving it there. So there's obviously the risk has moved away from the remote desktops to a cloud environment. So earlier, maybe when it was distributed, the risk is limited to 1 or 2 devices. Now it's in the cloud, so vulnerabilities are high. So obviously, setting up those security controls at the cloud server level where you are maintaining is key. And so you need to keep those factors in mind and ensure that all the data is protected. And obviously the PII and PHI, the standard procedures are there, and we just have to make sure that those are all during the transit, during the store at the rest time we address those.
So Bob, I have one commentary. This is Erin as an attendee here. Is what we found at our company is, initially you're so focused on that 1 or 2 systems, you're trying to get them out, you're trying to get the project done, get everything protected. When you look back a couple years later, after you have a very diverse implementation of cloud systems, you find that you have a vendor, a third party that's managing an application that has security practices. And we have a lot of regulatory demands, as we all know right now. And then underneath that, then you have all the different data storage and data centers that each of those vendors. If I were to do a matrix of the number of data centers across the organization where our data is stored, and then you look at how it's managed and how each of those vendors has a very diverse and spread out workforce. We found in our company that we had to really beef up our softer skills on vendor management and to try to come up with a common standard for what your security requirements are, your expectations for service levels. And we had to put quite a bit, we had kind of, we lost and we were down resource, so we saved some resource in one area. But you can't overlook the fact that then you have to beef up in other areas with different skills on how to manage all of this now.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a system where a piece of it goes down and there's dependencies and tentacles outside of that.
Yep.
I don't know if Erin wants to also, if you want to expand on, I think another big piece of this is having either a CISO on site or having a consultant that's doing that work for you, because that's done a lot of great things for us.
Yeah, and as mutuals, sometimes we are, constrained to have, just because of the size. A lot of us tend to be smaller or mid-size, let's say. I don't like to say small, but mid-size to, regional size shops. We just don't have thousands of people that have all those skills. So then you do need to start to bring in some other expertise to help you manage it. Sure. If anybody else has any comments on that.
One thing is definitely that is the one of the biggest challenges that we are also noticing with us when multi-cloud and hybrid environments are coming in, and that's where these whole new platforms are evolving, where they're these cloud management platforms where they're providing a single view to the different cloud environments that are under the enterprise view. So they're providing a single dashboard, they're providing a way to manage and administer each of these services, how the data is moving, the security configurations that are there in each of these environments. So that's where earlier I was talking about, where this orchestration ability to bring or integrate all these cloud services is becoming the biggest area that everybody's trying to address and figure out. And the tools are coming up and the platforms are coming to address that problem where they can bring it all together. It's certainly an area that a lot of work is happening, and those challenges are real. And each vendor has their own. Obviously, you sit with one ecosystem, for example, if you're Azure centric player, there's a lot more integration, a lot more things we can do. But when you go to multi-cloud, there is suddenly there's no standardization. There is so there's a challenge that we need to deal with. But that's where these CMP platforms are coming in to help us there. There's no clear solution which solves the problem, but certainly the research or new tools are coming in that area.
And we do have a question with everything moving towards or in the cloud. If you given all the more mainstream remote work, are carriers still pushing to VPN all traffic back to a core centralized localized data center and proxy, or try and manage solely on the endpoints?
This is more from access from a remote location to your data center.
Yes, with especially in the more distributed environment we have today, a lot of remote work.
At least I will talk about our experience of supporting our customers. Obviously, the customers are providing VPN, but the VPN, the issue with the VPN is people can use their own personal machines, and there are certain vulnerabilities that are there. But that's where the cloud-based gateways are coming. That's one of the solutions that we are seeing, where all the traffic routing happens via a cloud-based firewall, and through which the VPN connections, everybody connects into the enterprise network. When we had to implement more stringent data security guidelines, that's a route we have taken, where we made sure that all the users connect to a particular cloud-based the firewall, and from there we were taking them to the data center. So there is a we can track and monitor the traffic that's coming. What happens with the VPN or each of these endpoints is because of the way the endpoint connections are. They are, unless on the data center side we have a IP-based or a MAC-driven tracking, we're not able to track where the traffic is coming from. So some of those areas we are changing or adapting to meet these needs. So few customers we implemented that were depending on the customer's willingness, but those are the things that we are seeing.
I'll just have one more.
Aaron,
We have another question?
I'll just comment.
Well,
I'll just expand on GK's comment there. So from the PLM side, and from Randy's question, PLM is still operating in a VPN type model at this time. But I can tell you some things that are happening out there, like SD-WAN and Azure Intune services with the Azure Gateway services included in that can really provide some different mechanisms for secure transfer from endpoints without having to go through the VPN into that old traditional VPN back to the home office and then out through your firewall services. So there's definitely things coming in that way, and PLM is looking into those.
Super.
And just to add to that point, I think even the administration of these remote desktops with Intune and Cloudware, it's been a breeze. It's really helping the operations. Yeah, Andy, you were saying something.
Just a housekeeping point. We have, I think, 6 minutes left. So I wanted to jump to Andy so we don't leave him out here. But
you're good.
Andy, what am I missing if I'm not adopting to cloud?
Well, the sky's going to fall, if you don't adopt it. So, no, I think that there's opportunities that we've all talked. There's opportunities, there's risks, there's challenges. But I think likely there's more opportunity than not. So, some of the things that we've been concerned about, if we don't start this transition, when we or maybe become a little bit more aggressive about some of the items that we're transitioning, as we see young people coming out of school and, the skill set that they have, that they're tooled with, well, sure, we can teach them our way, but they're coming to the table with skills that work very well, and they're comfortable in a cloud environment. So that's one big ticket item that kind of comes to mind, Bob, and I don't know if that helps. And I was going to make just a really quick comment about the VPN question. You know, we are in a very similar environment. We are, you know, we have roughly 200 employees, 175 were here in the home office. And so the bulk of those are all working from home, connected through a VPN. And we went through these, we used to use split tunneling, but we elected to kind of adopt a VPN on all of the time model simply for some of those security reasons. And it seems like even when everything's working very well, but there's always kind of a weak link in the chain. So, and then BJ hit on some of the key pieces and GK that, you know, looking at some of these solutions from, you know, whether it be Intune or others that will enhance that. We're kind of in the same boat. So whoever asked the question, from the conversations I've had, it seems like that is a little bit of the norm in terms of the remote workforce, you know, connecting back through that VPN.
Super. Well, with 3 minutes left, do we have any final remarks? I mean, BJ, I think we owe you a turn, so I don't know if you have any final remarks. One question we're curious about was on cost. Is cloud cost saving?
Oh, well, I'm going to really clear things up here. I'll give you a clear as mud answer, and it's yes, no, and maybe, right? So yeah, unfortunately, there's no right answer or wrong answer to that. It definitely depends on a lot of factors. It depends on your CapEx versus OpEx model. And like Aaron had mentioned before about PLM, it's not a real big constraint for PLM, so it didn't affect us so much. I can tell you that some of the things we've implemented so far, we've seen some cost savings, and then others we really haven't. One of the things, and this is just my experience with going through all this over the last 8 to 10 years, is one thing that gets missed, I think sometimes, and it has for us, especially for going public cloud like an AWS or Azure. One thing to definitely look at that you can't always put an exact target on is your ingress and egress fees for the public cloud, storage and resources. So just that is one thing that it's really hard to budget for, and it's hard to tell if that, in the end, if you have a cost savings on the contract side, will you end up not having the savings anymore if your ingress and egress are going to put you over that edge. So it does matter, how much you're running, how long you're running the resource, how much storage you're taking up. When you need performance and you want to up that performance, that will cost you as well. So there's definitely a lot of factors, but the answer is yes, no, and maybe. And that's what I'm sticking to. I can't give you anything else.
Great. GK, any closing remarks?
I fully agree with Vijay. I think there's no one single answer, but we can have use cases, case studies, which shows all the three scenarios. The data access, data storage, how we are running the services. We have seen where initially when you start, it just, you don't realize the development servers are there, they just keep running and, you keep paying. So unless you have a very good controlled way to manage it or some tools to use, some mechanism to monitor, there are a lot of tooling we can do. We can certainly do tooling to create alerts. When we started, we were not tracking. Now we track everything. We have monitors, checks that come in. We have alerts coming in when the sizes are going up based on the budgeting. So there are tools that we have built to help us monitor it. That's one, definitely. There are different ways. So I agree with Vijay on the cost side. Now, just on some thoughts on the overall cloud. I think it's for us, it's a given, and all of us, enterprises have choices to make. Only I think when they are making these choices, obviously the data and security is definitely an important aspect that they need to look into, and then how the data is moving between the cloud environments. That's definitely an area to consider. But while this is two areas that definitely have looking is how do they orchestrate these cloud environments to help the manage it better is definitely needed. And certainly, especially in the new digital world, if you want to engage your customers, beyond the operations, beyond the cloud environments, looking at the business value, looking at the digital aspects of it, how do you open up these services, using the cloud capabilities is something that everybody should look at and come up with some digital platform strategy for the org level so that you can plan cloud investments around it. So
Great.
those are my closing thoughts.
GK, thank you. GK, Andy, BJ, thank you so much for participating today. Our time is up, but if any of the viewers who we appreciate spending time today, if you have questions, you can certainly send those in, and we'll do our best to get answers for you. So for now, this is signing off.
Yeah, just a couple of admin notes here. Thank you again, everybody, for participating. We had some more excellent and timely dialogue. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we're going to kind of go away from the tech and a little bit more into the human factor about our favorite topic, COVID. And we've got Nancy Caspero from Novarica that does a great presentation on that topic. So we welcome you back in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, BJ. Thank you, Andy.
Hi, it's Nancy Casparo that's on. Just wanting to know if my screen is sharing appropriately.
It is, yes.
Okay.
Hey,
Do
Nancy.
you, yep. Hello. Do you see my the PowerPoint show, or do you see the slide and the next slide view?
I see the normal PowerPoint that I would see when I'm working in it.
Okay, perfect. Oh, when you're working in it, it's not the slideshow?
No.
Okay, let me flip my screens. Okay, is that
Now I
better?
see the slideshow,
Okay,
yes.
great. I'm never sure which monitor it's going to choose.
I know it's tough and dealing with different platforms every day.
Okay, so I'm assuming you can see that. You can hear me. I guess we're good.
Yes, ma'am. So we'll give it about 2 minutes here to take off.
Sure. How's the day been?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
It's a long day, I know.
Yeah.
All right. So hopefully people still have another hour left in them.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if we're live or not, but
Okay.
okay. Sounds like we are ready to go. Just give me 1 moment here. So, all right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your quick break there. So this afternoon, we have Nancy Keating-Casparo with us. Quick intro to Nancy. She's the VP of Research and Consulting at Novarica. She's bringing over 30 years of insurance technology experience. Most of those were spent in senior IT leadership positions at MetLife. Most recently, Nancy has served as the IT Solution Delivery VP for the group benefits business at MetLife. She supported products, claims, underwriting, distribution development, and national accounts. She also has some extensive experience in P&C, supporting data warehousing, business intelligence, financial reporting, agent commissions, and imaging and workflow applications at MetLife Auto and Home Company. She also brings experience in IT strategy, application consolidation, business process and alignment, mobile development, and data and reporting. She's got a BS in MIS from University of Rhode Island, and her email is displayed on the screen there for any follow-up questions on this or any of those other topics. So with that, I turn it over for a little bit lighter conversation here, a little bit more on the human side of things. Let's take it away, Nancy.
Erin, thanks so much. And I'm really glad to be with all of you today. I know you've all been in all kinds of sessions today and all kinds of topics. And although my resume has a lot of technology that was listed on that, we really are going to dive into probably one of my favorite topics, is just really around leadership and how all of that is really crucial to ever making a technology project actually work. So we're going to talk a little bit about COVID. I know we're all maybe a little bit tired of hearing it, but you really can't start a conversation these days without addressing the fact that the world has changed. And really, what has that done from a workplace perspective? And what are the best practices and things we can do and things as leaders we can do to really move forward and to help everyone to move forward so that we can find and evolve to what is going to be the way that we're working going forward. So what we'll talk about a little bit is we'll talk a little about the technology aspect, right? A little bit about what it really meant to go to remote work and some of the challenges and opportunities of remote work. I'm going to then fold in some principles of emotional intelligence and leadership, and then apply that back to the remote work world. And what does it really mean, and how can it really help us, and what are the things that you can use in order to make this actually a better working experience for each of you individually, but also for the people around you. And then if we have time, we'll go into talking about the return to office and the hybrid model that could be ahead of us as well. I say if we have time because I'm really hoping that it can be an interactive conversation. If you have experiences or things you want to add to the discussion, by all means, I'd really like to hear your stories. I think it's much more impactful when you hear what's really happening. So you will get the complete deck is out on the website, so you'll get it all. And if we don't get to it, actually, I'll think it is a success if we don't get to go through all of the material together. So we'll talk about the technology and remote work. So if we can think back to March, which in some ways feels like it was a couple of years ago, we all knew the pandemic came and we had to respond. So it was really a call to action for the technology team, but it was a call to action for the business team as well, because as we know, no real goals in business can be achieved unless you really have alignment between both of those. So we moved to a remote work environment along with the rest of the world almost overnight. And that was an incredible accomplishment that I don't think we really took time to celebrate and understand. When survival is your motivator, we can do some amazing things. And I think that's really what we did. So when you think of it, prior to the pandemic, there were about 14% of the employees in the US that worked from home 5 days a week. Different sources will give you different numbers. These are hard to nail down. But when you look at that now, it's estimated to be 50 to 60% of employees are working from home 5 days a week. We know it was an enormous change. It really was a shift in the way that we did work and what the expectations were for the tools that we needed to do that work. So when I say the technology teams responded, they really did. It was one of those where they had to figure out, how do we make this happen? All kinds of things were happening, whether it was, people set up drive-ins for employees to come in to have contactless ways to get their equipment. Help desks were set up to be able to help people through the simplicity of setting up a home office. It's simple if you know how to do it, but if you've never had to, it's not a simple thing. And really figuring out how to do that, how to respond to people's needs and get people up and running so the business could continue was a pretty impressive feat. And it's one that we really shouldn't forget because it really shows the resilience and the ability for us to deliver when we have a common goal. The technology we provided in some cases might not have been perfect because when you remember back in March, we thought we were doing this as a short-term thing. We thought this was kind of a sprint. We needed to figure out how to bridge the gap before we went back to normal, whatever that was going to be. So we might have cut some corners. We might have figured out ways to get it done. But there was it really wasn't thinking about the long term at that point. And that was okay. That's what we knew. We rolled out video platforms. Agents started using video platforms to interact with their potential customers. It was a different time. But those video platforms also became our social platforms. So if you think about it, we were working on those. We were actually having, I think everybody had, happy hours during the week where you would do that. Families were gathering that way, and everybody, generation to generation, was using this pretty quickly. So it really shows the capacity for people to adapt to new technologies when that is what is going to make their lives better. And then one of the other challenges we had was suddenly everybody was home. The kids were home for school. Mom and dad were home working. And we were really taxing the bandwidth that could create some really slow and frustrating experiences, or those video calls where you just freeze. But we knew it was just for a short amount of time, or so we thought. So then we realized, that April went by, May went by, June went by, and we were still home. The whole summer went by, and most of us are still home. So this remote work experiment is probably going to become business as usual for some people. I truly believe we're going to evolve into some kind of a hybrid model, and I think we're going to take the best parts of it, hopefully, and understand where it's more important to stay in the office. So there's different projections of what's going to happen, but according to economists at Harvard Business, they're saying that 1 in 6 workers is projected to continue working from home or co-working at least a couple of days a week. Upwork did some surveys that found 1/5 of the workforce could be entirely remote after the pandemic. So I think when we're looking at it, we know it's probably not going to go back to exactly what it was. And I think people are starting to think that's okay. And I think the option to be working from home or working in the office might actually give us some real benefits that we'll talk about. So we don't know what the future is really going to be. But one of the things we know is that it wasn't a sprint. It's become more of a marathon, and we need to figure out how to help our employees. So from a technology perspective, there's carriers are refreshing only with laptops. So believe it or not, lots of people still had desktops, and they're realizing that's probably not going to cut it in the new world of remote work, or we say kind of work from anywhere, because it doesn't matter where you are, you're just not in the office. Dual monitors are something that's being budgeted for, although some companies actually rolled those out right at the very beginning because they knew that their folks could not be productive without that. The companies are looking at reimbursing for phone, internet, or enhanced internet services to address some of the challenges, as well as stipends for setting up their office. And those are things companies are doing on their own, but there are states that are now reviewing some of the laws to say what should the company's obligation to pay for the employee's cost for work from home. So I think we're going to see some differences there, some expectations. And I think companies are going to volunteer to do some things, and I think in some cases it's going to be a requirement of them. So I think that's still a to be determined. There's a lot to be determined. We just know it's not going to be quite what it is today, and it's probably not going to be what it was before. So from a technology perspective, I think it's important to understand security is always important. So at this point, spear phishing attacks increased because people see an opportunity, right? And people are going to do nefarious things, and they're going to look to say, is there an opportunity for me to do more? And obviously, with everybody starting to work remotely, there was. So the phishing emails increased 600% in March. And there was lots of malicious activity people saw. And there was definitely an understanding that we're going to have to pay more attention to it. And it's not that people weren't paying attention to cybersecurity, they were. It's just that as everything changes around us, we're really going to need to think about how we address this on an even more aggressive basis. So endpoint technologies are being looked at for those that didn't have it, to make sure that your device is actually the device that's supposed to be getting into a company's information. Firewalls are being strengthened. Cybersecurity's capabilities are really being tested because the vulnerabilities are there, and as the world changes, new vulnerabilities are going to be uncovered, and we're going to need to address them. If you remember at the very beginning when everyone was doing the video calls, there were some challenges there where people kind of jumped into calls they weren't supposed to be in, the Zoom bombing, and it was addressed. But I think we're going to need to continue as the video platforms get rolled out or enhanced. It is going to be, the onus is going to be on companies to make sure that those are working as thought. So it's just going to be a continued vigilance that's going to be there. And I think that there's just more opportunity for some of these challenges because we're all not in the office and not in the networks that we have been in the past. So some of the lessons learned from all of that is that technology and business teams, they can be nimble and agile, right? And I think that's something you really need to think about and embrace. You probably went through a time to really get this information in place, or all of these capabilities in place, in a time frame that you never would have planned. It was literally overnight. And that's something you really should draw on, and that muscle to be able to address problems quickly, and maybe not perfectly every time, but good enough, is something that we need to think about as we're moving forward in other types of projects and enhancements. We've got some preconceived notions about workforces at home that we'll talk about. And some of those we need to kind of revisit, and we need to look at what we've been doing and really understand, was it successful? And maybe the things that I thought were going to be a problem are not a problem. The other, as I said before, cybersecurity is never done. So I don't think I need to say a lot more about that. I think that people on this call understand that very well. And that we did find that we have new ways to communicate, right? The video platforms are really effective, although they have their downfalls. We probably weren't using all of the communication vehicles that we had well before, but we should take that even as we go back to the office and make sure that communication is a key priority. And lastly, culture is an important element of a company's identity. And I think we found some of the challenges to that when we were not all together. And it's something that we need to figure out how to actively support that regardless of what our location is. So some important things that we needed to kind of take away. So we'll go into the challenges. And again, if you've got any experiences or thoughts that you want to share here, please, I would love to hear your actual stories. But I think we all know that we're lacking personal communication during this time. People can feel very, very isolated. And it's both employees, but it's leaders as well, right? Everybody's human, and there's some challenges here, and we need to be aware of them to try to get past them. So I think when we're looking at, the in-person communication that's trying to be, we'll say, replaced by emails or instant messages. It really doesn't quite do it. It's an opportunity, but I think we need to remember that sometimes all those instant messages and emails and video meetings can be really tiring. And sometimes there is a Zoom fatigue, and we need to accept that. And we need to be really just aware of how people are reacting to the ways that we're communicating to see if there's something that we need to do differently. There's also the casual, water cooler interactions, the thing when you see somebody in a hallway and you ask them a question, or you tell them, you did a really good job on that presentation, or, thanks for handling something. Those kinds of interactions are important. It's also an opportunity to talk to people on a personal level, and we just don't have that, right? It's just, we don't bump into people anymore. It's got to be a really planned thing. And if it's always planned and it's always about business, it can get exhausting. People need a little bit of downtime, and the only way to really build some relationships is to have some of those interactions. So I think that's something that's going to be a continued challenge for us. So before I do that, just is there anybody on that has any different ways of kind of bridging that interaction, that casual interaction? Any tips or tricks that people have found that's really worked for them? Anybody brave enough to share?
Yeah, you can just feel free to raise your hand, and Pamela will unmute you, or you can use your Q&A to type in some responses.
So one of the things I will mention is that I do know of some companies that have decided to always start meetings on the hour, but they don't start business until 10 past the hour. Sounds simple, but it's really giving people that 10 minutes of gathering. It's trying to emulate the entering the conference room and chit-chatting as you're on the way in. And it's a technique. It works to a certain extent. We have found that sometimes when you do that, people don't show up till 10 past the hour, which really defeats the purpose. But the point is, people are really trying to understand how you handle some of these changes and how you try to make sure that there is still a human element in everything that we do. Because when it's all business, it's difficult.
Yeah, so Nancy, a couple things we've tried to do. We've done some things at the corporate level, bingo games. This week we incorporated some of the games with families, so we're doing some sessions in the evening. We can make it a little bit more lighthearted. And some of our meetings, we will, everybody wear your favorite hat or something like that, just to kind of generate, well, where'd you get that hat? You have to tell a story better, and they seem kind of corny, but I think the reception is a little bit different these days. It's getting, a little more of that casual type of conversation. I'd love to hear if any other companies have had some good techniques there too. Quiet there, so
yeah, that's okay.
Q&A is open, so if something comes into your mind a few slides later, just feel free to type it on in there.
Okay. So one of the other things that can be a challenge with work from home is measuring effectiveness, right? So leaders are really responsible for setting the tone and promoting trust, which is really what we need to focus on. And I'll keep coming back to that topic. But as we know, everyday feedback can be hard to give and to receive, right? It's again that there are no casual interactions. But you got to remember, even when you have a casual interaction, there's sometimes you're telling somebody, hey, you know what, thanks for handling such and such, or, you know, you did a good job on this. It's not even planned feedback. It just happens because you have an interaction. Those aren't there, and we need to figure that out, because people can start thinking, I've been working and working and no one's noticing, right? And it's not that people are needy, but everybody needs feedback. And I think those are the kinds of things you need to think through, and even think about the people above you. They need feedback too, right? They're doing something that's making this time easier. Let them know that. It's a simple human interaction, but it really can be impactful to somebody who might be having a bad day.
Yeah, Nancy, we've got some feedback from James McGann saying his company has been doing virtual lunches and happy hours. They're finding effective.
Yeah, and those are great, right? Because it's not expecting you to perform or to be on. It's really a time to interact, which can be a lot of fun. Although I look back and I think at the beginning, there was a time when I would have like 3 happy hours a week, which is just not the norm for me. So you almost had to kind of prioritize some of those to make sure that you were getting that interaction. But you know, sometimes it can make the day go on longer than you anticipated. So those are all good opportunities. Just remember to be flexible with people and what they can fit into their day. So thanks for that feedback. It's good to hear that people are thinking of different things to do. I think everybody is seeing these things, but sometimes really just thinking about them and understanding how to address them can be really difficult. So some of the other things that we have with effectiveness is that, you know, sometimes leaders can struggle when they can't see the people that are working for them. I mean, it sounds strange, but it used to be that you'd walk out of your office and you saw everybody working, right? Everyone's working. Look how good this is. And I think you need to kind of turn that on its head a little bit, and you just need to trust, right? So you need to trust that they're working, that they're doing it to the best of their ability. They might be doing it differently at different hours, different methods. But what you want to do is look at what are the goals. So you're not managing people, you're leading people, and there really is a difference. And that can be a really difficult thing because it's just not the way we're used to working. Same way that employees can start to judge each other harshly, right? Somebody has to take some time off in the middle of the day because they have some commitments or challenges because they're working from home. And suddenly I start to feel like I'm the one that's got all the work on my desk. And how did that happen? It's probably not the case, but you just need to think about that and how to communicate and open up those lines of communication so that everybody's understanding that. The other thing to think about is people are not always going to immediately respond to your emails, even during the day, right? People's schedules have changed. Don't set that expectation. And the other 8 to 5 might not be the hours, right? There might be some opportunities that people need to take some time during the day, and they're going to work at night. Again, focus on the goals as opposed to the number of hours somebody's sitting in front of their computer.
Yeah. Nancy, back on the little bit related to the previous slide, any thoughts or ideas or observations on what companies are doing to successfully onboard new people and get them integrated into your culture and your teams?
Yeah, that's a really great question because there are a lot of challenges with that from a couple of different ways, right? So there's some of it is how do I train somebody, right? Because it's harder to look over someone's shoulder, right? When you are remote, but people are doing some of those, and there are some tools for, we'll say, kind of sharing that people are watching what people are doing. They're doing some of that. They usually are still setting up that buddy system kind of thing, but it's not like it's the buddy that you can sit next to and just tap on their shoulder, but it's somebody that they feel comfortable that at any time during the day they can reach out and they can get somebody that's going to help them. They're trying to bring in some of those, happy hours and those kinds of things so that the people can actually meet and start to build those relationships. I think the jury is still out on how well that's working yet. I know at Novarica, we have a brand new associate who started. Actually, she started in the middle of the pandemic. And she adapted really, really well. I was really impressed by how quickly she came up to speed. But she wasn't afraid to reach out. And we really tried to bring her into meetings and consulting events and all of those things so she could at least watch and learn. And then we made some people available to her all the time. So people are doing it. It's just it's different. And I think at some point, people aren't sure how to measure the effectiveness because it's different. And I think it's going to be over time, we're going to see how effective it really was. Okay. So the same with meeting and knowledge share, same kind of thing. People are setting up meetings that we talked about. Some people are putting rules around how many meetings and what times. I'm not a fan of those kinds of things personally. It might work for some companies, but I think you just need to be a little more flexible, but give people opportunities to get together. There are real needs, especially when you're in a leadership position, to understand how people are doing. Mental health has become a real focus because we're finding there's a lot more people reaching out for help. They're disconnected. They're finding a lot of challenges. And really watching people and seeing them, you would usually know when somebody's maybe going through something, or you'd have the opportunity to have that conversation so you can better understand their situation and help them in any way. Really setting up time for casual conversations. It almost sounds counterintuitive because you're going to plan a casual conversation, but making sure that you have those opportunities is really important for the well-being and for people to feel a connection and for you to be able to understand if people need more help.
Mm-hmm. We have another attendee that notes Teams as a platform has been helping them at their company, and they've been doing weekly lunches. So
yeah, and that's great too. And I think that the great thing is we do have technology that helps now, and people are finding new ways to use it. I don't think we've done some of these things in the past, and we could have, just like Zoom, right? I did a family game night with all of my extended family. We never did that. We didn't have time, but we use Zoom and we could do it. So it's interesting to see how people are being creative with the tools that we have. So when you think about some of the preconceived notions, right? Because there are definitely some preconceived notions about working remotely or working from home. So there is a challenge and a fear that the culture of the company will change. Yes, it could. So I think that's where you really have to attend to it and understand what is the culture you're trying to promote and what are the things we need to do differently when we're remote that can help to continue to have your culture thrive. Because your culture is a really important part of how you operate as a business. Back to it's difficult to manage people I can't see every day. So go from managing to leading, and that's just something that you really need to just get used to. It's just a different view, and I think it's a much more productive and encouraging view. The fact that people are going to be distracted by things at home, childcare, homeschool, yes, they are. Right? It's a difficult time. Be flexible with people. Trust in people, and you're going to find that they are going to be more than willing to give back on the other end. Some of these others, it's uncomfortable to kind of basically be getting into somebody's house through video or through calls. I think we've all gotten pretty used to it by now, seeing people's kids, their cats, their dogs, and things happening. It kind of makes us all a little bit more human, and I think that we're getting used to it. It's not as embarrassing as it once was. People have accepted it. And it actually can be funny sometimes. And I think some of the things that we need to remember is just to help people to understand things are not going to be done the way they used to be done. But that's okay. Sometimes change can be a really good thing if we make it work for us. So I'm just curious, and any other concerns or things that maybe were debunked now that people are home and working and probably working pretty well?
Yeah, I can offer a comment there. When you talk about the culture changing, I think it's important from a leadership perspective that we know what types of things we want to make sure that we preserve about our company, and make sure that they're well known. I mean, we have a few key things that we like to do in our professional appearance. When we return phone calls, some of those things that despite the virtual environment, we may have to adapt a little of them, but there's some things that, you're less flexible on because you don't want to completely lose your company culture either when everything changes. So it's a delicate balance, and you might have to get creative there.
Yeah, agreed. Because I think you start to think about what was important about who we are. What are the things that we need to make sure we're preserving, or what are the things we feel may be slipping? And there may be some things that you did that maybe in the end weren't that important. And I think some of that's so it's just because it changes doesn't mean it changes for the worse, as long as you preserve the things that really make you who you are as a company. And the way that you present yourself to the outside world obviously is a huge piece of that. So you want to make sure that that you keep that in check. So there are some benefits. I won't go into these a lot because some of these are really talking about working from home because you want to. But there are people that really like to work from home. They're really productive. And we know that there's some people right now that are truly not liking this. So we just need to remember that. But try to look at the positive side of these, right? So people aren't commuting. It's less time and cost that's spent. There's an ability to be more flexible. These are some things that many companies would never have tried, but we were forced into it. And some people were really happy that we got the chance to do this experiment, and it worked pretty well. In general, in the past, it's always been looked at that employees that work from home are generally happier, believe it or not, because there's less stress. I think right now that's hard to measure because there's other stresses in the world going on. So I think that kind of remains to be seen how that's going to work. But one of the things to think of from a business perspective is that if you choose to continue to allow people to work from someplace else, the talent pools will open up exponentially for you, because you do not have to rely on just the talent within your geography, especially for very specific niche skills. It really opens it up to be able to do that. So we're going to flip it just a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and leadership, right? And I promise you these things will all come together. And this is something that I find very interesting. And we'll talk just a little bit about what leadership is and what it isn't, right? So leadership is not power, position, title, managing, and it's not about you. So those are really important things to think about. It's a different mindset. Leaders have very specific roles to play, and it really is serving the people, it's serving the company they work for and serving the people that they're leading. So it's the ability to align people on common goals. You're going to hear me say common goals a lot. To inspire people on what's possible, take responsibility for your people, but it's also very earned, right? You can be someone's boss because of a position, but you need to earn the right to be a leader for them, because they're not going to lead unless they want to. So the things that you can do, right? And leaders, you got to remember, there's leaders at every level, right? It doesn't mean that you're at the top level. It can be at all levels. There are people who are natural leaders that people kind of flock to, that they follow. And some of that is because they have confidence in themselves and they have confidence in the people that they work with. And that can really be contagious, and it can make it fun to work with them. There's an innate response where they've encouraged people that you've got this. You can kind of boost those people around you so that they really feel the confidence to really achieve. And they can really kind of show what the future looks like, and they can help people find meaning in what they do. And that's a really important piece. And I don't know that people always understand, but you want to think that what you do every day is really important. So that kind of leads into that goal setting at a company level. And how do you keep bringing people back to what they do and why that's important to the company or to the customer? So there's some really simple things that you can look at. So there's how can you talk about what somebody does and how that helps to serve policyholders? And Erin, I think you'll recognize that one because it's from Penn Lumbermen's website that I got that. And it's, or to spread the power of optimism, which if it doesn't look familiar, that's what the Life is Good company aims to do every day. Or to inspire humanity, both in the air and on the ground, that's JetBlue. So how do you talk about what somebody does and how it comes back to why the company exists? It's a really important and impactful thing for people to demonstrate how their contributions add up. And sometimes it takes some thought as to how to do that, but it really is really the job of a leader to do some of that and understand and help them to be inspired, but also satisfied with what they do. And the one thing that we can say is that companies that really have a compelling kind of reason for being, and get that to go down to all levels of their organization are more productive, more successful. And that really doesn't matter where you are from a physical perspective. It just is an impactful thing. So I am going to stop and just ask if anybody can share one of their, kind of the goal of their company, or any way that they can, anything to share on those. Because these, I always find these really interesting because they usually are very inspirational and really talks about what you do as a business. Anybody want to share? Sorry, Erin, I took yours, so you can't share yours. No one yet? Okay. If anybody pops in, Erin, you can let me know. So let's talk a little bit about what emotional intelligence really is. So there's 4 pieces of it around, but I'll get into a little bit around self-awareness and self-management. You can Google this and you can read for months on all of the research that's been done around this. We're just going to kind of talk about some of the basic principles because there's some really basic things that can really help you from a relationship perspective at work, but actually it works at home too. So some things to think about. But those leaders that possess a high percentage of emotional intelligence, when you look at their results, they usually have better financial results. They have better climates and cultures at the places they work at, and they usually achieve more productivity. So there's something to this, right? So, and it's not just emotionally intelligent. They obviously are people that understand the business. They have a high business acumen, but their ability to understand the business and understand people and bring that together for results is what's really where they become true impactful leaders. So when we talk about those 4 pieces, right, it's the emotional intelligence is, knowing and managing your own emotions, motivating yourself, recognizing and understanding other people's emotions, and managing those relationships. These are the things you do every day. And you know what, there's some days where you do it really well, and there's some days where you don't, right? I think everybody has good and bad days. The point of all of this is to make it be something that's kind of in the forefront of your mind, or it could be at the end of the day, you kind of reflect on the things that you did, and you continually try to be better at it. It's not a once and done, it's a continuing thing that you need to do. So when you think about recognizing and understanding your moods and emotions, you really want to think of it in the effect of what does it do to other people? Right? Am I impulsive? Does my mood immediately become impactful on somebody else in a negative kind of a way? The other kind of behaviors that you usually have is that people that are in a leadership kind of a position and they have a high degree of emotional intelligence usually have a real passion for what they do. And that goes back to being able to tie people's work to the overall goals. It's more than just, I want to be the boss and I want to make a lot of money, right? Those are all great things. That has nothing to do with emotional intelligence. It's really around, I really want to do this. I'm excited about this and I can excite other people as well. And the last part is they can really know how to build relationships and networks because that's really what it's all about, right? You can have a lot of great business knowledge. If you cannot bring people together to make things happen, then your leadership is really not going to be impactful. So we'll quickly go through the sections, right? So Daniel Goleman is one of the people who's done all kinds of research in this. And, the quote of, if you're tuned out of your own emotions, you'll be poor at reading them in other people, right? So it's first, if you don't understand where you're coming from, it's very difficult to understand where other people are coming from as well. So if you're being critically self-reflective, you understand when you're dealing with somebody what they're feeling, right? If you're going to go into a conversation with somebody, you want to put yourself in their shoes sometimes to make sure that you're understanding and at least give them the opportunity to tell you how they're feeling, because this communication is 2 ways. And sometimes when you get into a point of directing people, you forget to get that return information. And so that's an important piece. There's also a critical piece of understanding what your own strengths are. We're all good at things and we're all not so good at some things. And that's where you might need some help. Understand some of those and be fine with it, be comfortable with it, and understand how you can work as a team to make sure that that's kind of overcome. And then the self-confidence piece. There's nothing more attractive than a self-confident person. It is contagious, and it is something that can be, that really people will start to feel themselves. If they feel confident in their leader, they feel confident in themselves. Self-management is an interesting one because it's all about your own control, right? Everybody has a bad day, and maybe at the end of the day, somebody brings them a problem. It's not huge, but you might lose it on that one. That is definitely a sign of not keeping your impulses, right? Not truly understanding where you are in that specific situation, not understanding what that person is bringing to you. So those are the kinds of things you want to try to overcome so that you can understand some of that. You also want to try to adapt and really show a need to achieve. These are all the things around self-management and understanding how you really move it forward, but how you keep things in check for yourself so that you can inspire others. And again, I throw some quotes in every once in a while because they're the ones that I like the best. And Jack Welch is an interesting leader. But I think this is a really good quote where he talked about success is that before you're a leader is to grow yourself, right? So you're self-focused. When you become a leader, it's really about others. So really, how do you change your mindset to understand what's happening with everyone else? And how do you encourage everyone else? So that's part of the whole social awareness. And empathy is a really big piece of that. Understanding, you know, what's concerning to others and make that concerns of yourself. Understanding how, you know, organizational awareness, which so you can understand how all of these decision networks happen, how politics happen, but don't slow things down, and how you can work around that. And then understanding how you really focus on the service to the folks that are working with you, but also service to your end customer if the end customer is kind of the goal. And then the last piece is around relationship management. I think it might be one of the most important, and it kind of uses all the other pieces to say, how do you develop others? How do you build the relationships that need to be in place to be able to influence, to be able to be the change catalyst? And really importantly, how to diffuse conflicts and resolve them, because that's a really difficult one. That's one that can actually turn everything on its head if conflicts are not hit. Being emotionally intelligent doesn't mean that you're just the nice guy all the time. Sometimes it's incumbent on you to not be the nice guy. You need to come in and hit things really head on, but do it in a way that's understanding where people are coming from. Not everyone's going to like you all the time. Sometimes it's a hard thing to accept, but it's things that you have to do. So it really is, it requires some self-confidence and strength and to hit things head on. So those are kind of the pieces that come together from a leadership. Anybody want to comment on anything that was surprising or anything you don't agree with? Okay.
Well, Nancy, I'll just throw something in there when you're talking about emotional intelligence. Maybe you'll get into it here in this remote workforce, but when you're trying to resolve a conflict, when you're together in a more informal environment, especially if it's conflict between people, I think it's easier to sort of pull people around a table. You immediately have the human aspect. You can go out for lunch, different things you can do to more softly bring people together. Any tips for, how you do that in a virtual environment, and all you can do is bring people together on a screen?
Yeah, and it is a lot less personal, right? So it's harder, but I do believe the video does help, right? So it's sometimes easier to be difficult or not want to compromise if you're just a voice, right? If there's just this faceless voice, it's a little harder. When you're looking somebody in the eye, the human element kind of kicks in and you start realizing I need to work through this. So I would say if there's difficulties, that's where video has to come in. And I think we're starting to understand that connection a little bit. You can see some body language when you're on video. So you're going to start seeing if people are being open or not, and you can address some of that. The other is sometimes, and this happens even if you're in person, but you sometimes, if you're brokering some conflict, you might want to talk to the people separately right? To understand it and to also make them understand the true benefit of coming together and resolving some of that conflict. And sometimes that's better one-on-one because people hear messages differently. And that's part of what you need to do is you need to tailor your message to your audience. And sometimes you're going to have some very different personalities. So and it also depends on how difficult the conflict is, right? But I think you have to rely on video now just because it's the world we're in. And I think people are better at it. They've gotten better because they've had to.
Yeah, we have a comment here. One of the personal aspects with video is you have a slight window into their personal world, more so than things they choose to bring into their cube to express a piece of their personal life, which is an excellent point. So.
That is an excellent point because it's suddenly much more personal, right, than it used to be. I mean, even though when you would go into somebody's office and you would see a picture of their kids or their spouse or something and you'd kind of talk about this, you're right, their whole world is almost in sight. And there are some opportunities for that to be a connection point for some people. I can't tell you how many times I'm on a call and I'll see something in the back and I'll say, oh, did you go such and such college? Or the things that I wouldn't know about them, except they've got it all around them. So look for those connections and encourage others to look for that as well. So how do we've talked about a bunch of different topics, how do we pull those all together? So it's really around, we are in a difficult time, and I think it's really hard to lead during this time, and people need it more than ever, right? They really need someone who's going to help them through this. So you got to remember that the emotional intelligence piece is not an end to itself. It's an insight, and it's something you work on, and it's something you think about as you're interacting with people, and it becomes more and more natural. Some people are just really good at it because it's the way they are. Others need to remind themselves of it on a regular basis, and that's okay. Working on it usually means you're going to be doing it better and better. So some things to think about as you're in this very stressful time, and everybody else is too. Try to reduce the negative emotions. I think people have gotten a little bit better. I think at the beginning there was a lot of stress and there was a lot of negativity about being home and how long is it going to happen. And I think people have worked some of that out. But as we start looking at the unknown of what's going to happen as the winter comes, what's going to happen if people start saying we have to go back to the office, you need to try to remember to kind of think those through, reduce the negative pieces, and just kind of weigh those options so that you're kind of bringing a balanced view to everyone. You need to stay cool and manage stress, and I think we can tell that to everybody, but it's something you do have to focus on sometimes. The other thing is being assertive, and I think I mentioned this before. This is not just you're the nice person who does what everybody wants. Not at all. You're really in a place where you need to identify when there's times that you need to step in, when there's times where it's important for you to not be the nice guy, right? To be assertive, express things that are difficult when it's necessary, and help people to understand that. And that can be difficult, but I think it's really, really needed. But doing it in a way that is soft enough so that people accept it, but hard enough so that people understand it is where the line is. So you need to stay proactive, right? When there's difficult situations that you need to deal with, you need to show an ability to bounce back from adversity. Because I think if you look at any successful leader, they have failed in the past. And being able to bounce back and show that you can bounce back and learn from things is really important. Nobody expects anybody to be perfect. The having direct conversations without malice. You're not in there to teach somebody a lesson. You're there to make things better for everybody and to help people. And sometimes that requires some really direct and uncomfortable information to be shared. And then you do and say the appropriate thing without fear, right? You might have to say something difficult. Don't be afraid of it. Just embrace it and get it out there, because a lot of times it's going to impact everybody around you when you get that done. And nothing on leadership would be complete without quoting Michael Scott from The Office, because if there's anyone you can learn from on leadership, it's Michael Scott. Just do the opposite of anything he ever did. I don't know if there's any Office fans out there, but would I rather be feared or loved? Easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me, right? So you're not there just for people to love you for, because you're the most wonderful person. You're there because you want to have their respect and their trust. Sure, you want them to like you, and there are times when they won't, because there's some really hard decisions you need to make. Just be confident in those, that you're doing them for the right reason. So some strategies around helping with the remote workforce, right? So some of the things you need to do, you need to set some boundaries so that you can show others that they can set boundaries too, right? There's different norms that we're doing right now. How do you make sure that you have the time for yourself when you're home? You're not necessarily working 24 hours a day, even though you're in your office 24 hours a day. Try things like, if you need to be available to teams or people that report to you, have office hours, right? I'm going to be on video. I'm going to set up a Zoom call or a GoToMeeting or whatever it is, from 2 to 2:30 every Tuesday. Feel free to drop in if you want to just stop in and talk. And those kinds of things, they're somewhat casual and informal, and it can be a way to show that you are available without them feeling like I have to call you. Make daily contact with people. A lot of it is just a reach out. Hey, how you doing? Just checking, is there anything I can help with? Not giving them something to do, not checking to see if they're working. It's really just saying, I'm here for you if you need me. And the other is setting time, real time to talk, but making it a time to check in that's convenient for them, not a checkup to say, you know what, it's 4:30 on Friday, let's make sure they're still working. People see through that, and it's just, it shows a lack of trust, and a lack of trust is going to breed a lack of trust on the other side as well. And then remind yourself to celebrate successes. I know this is one that I've always had to remind myself of. It's hard now. It used to be when there was something that happened, you might have a cake at work or a pizza or those kinds of things to say, wow, that was a really good job. Now we don't have that. And sometimes just saying thank you can be enough, right? You just have to remember to do it without making it an event. And you're going to look at this one and say, this is really basic. But think about how many times you don't do it, right? Because I know I don't do it, right? So when you're really talking with somebody, and because this time contact and communication is so important, stop what you're doing. Are you really talking to them? Or are you doing an email or preparing for the next meeting or doing 5 other things at the same time because you're so used to multitasking? But try to give people your time, because your time is really important and it's very precious these days. And those communications and contacts are really important. Think about, just really the kinds of messages that you're giving to people through your body language. And if you have to talk about a decision that's difficult or something, that's hard, we're going to talk about, at some point, we're going to talk about going back to the office. And that can be really difficult for some people. Think about what the conversation means to the other person, so that you can understand how you kind of measure your words, so that they can hear it, and that they hear that you're empathetic to what they're going to go through. But these are the decisions from a company perspective. I think that's going to be a difficult time for a lot of people. So think that through. And then just simple, emotionally proofread your message. If you send that message, we need to talk. Like, I see those and like they're immediately, something's got to be wrong. What you really meant was, we need to talk about, a project, or we need to just think about what you're sending, because your body language isn't there. It's just words. So some of the things to think about from, genuine empathy and being a leader, just to kind of sum it up, is, believe people are committed. Take an interest in people, a true, authentic interest. Share yourself with them, right? You have challenges. It's okay to show them. It doesn't mean you have to be emotional about it, but there's some things that are difficult for you during this time. It's okay. It makes you more human and approachable, because building that trust is going to help. If they need you, they're going to know that they can rely on you. Then we talked about listening and being flexible with what people can do. The other is making sure people have the right tools they need for their job. It sounds basic, but people might need some different things at home, and make sure that they can get them, because that can be really difficult. And then just be open and honest. It's a difficult time for a lot of people. There's a lot of questions, and we don't have all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know the answers. And the other is to focus on the well-being and the mental health of people. I cannot tell you how many times this comes up with the insurers that we deal with on a regular basis. People are really seeing a rise in people having issues from a mental health perspective, from isolation, from stress. And they've done different things, right? Some of them have made therapists available to people at no charge. They've got leave programs, COVID leave programs. They're adding something called mental health days, right? It's not your vacation time, it's additional days off, and it's okay to just take it because you need it. This is a little bit of a play on words, but changing sick days to wellness days so people feel that you don't have to be terribly sick to take a day off. Early closings, mindfulness training, resilience training. People are really trying to figure things out. And then even some online workouts and yoga. I'm trying to figure out how to make sure that people are doing well. It's important, and I don't think we're going to see the effects from a mental health perspective. We're not going to see really how dramatic it was, I think, for at least another couple of years. And I think we're going to look back and see that we saw some real issues that, we missed. Anybody else have anything that they're doing in their companies that they'd want to share from this perspective to make things better for their employees or to really watch for their well-being?
I think you've got the end of the day group here.
I know, that's okay.
Yeah, but we're also getting a lot of really great ideas that we can get back to our companies if we're not doing some of these things.
That's okay. So we can move on. So just kind of in a summary. I mean, this is really taking a bunch of different concepts and really applying it to the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic and that we've changed how we work. You can really take all of these concepts and apply it to a transformational change within your company. You can apply it to kind of a reorganization at your company. All these things are it's something that's different that people need to deal with. And the leadership aspect of it is really what's going to make it a success or not. So applying these kinds of things to what you do is going to make you more effective, and it's going to help people through no matter what the challenge is. Those are the kinds of things that are going to help them. So I know
we did have one share about one company, the HR is pushing out games. I think we talked about that before, and calling each of the employees just to kind of check in, see how they're doing. So I know, I think at our company, we also went over the EAP, Employee Assistance Program, just in case anybody is suffering with potentially, there's some that have depression and, different issues that might pop up being by themselves, and any other types of dynamics. So just a reminder that those programs exist for them.
Yeah, and usually you're right. There are a lot of programs that companies have that people just aren't really familiar with, right? It's one of those things that's on the website, and so reminding them is good. The other thing we need to remember is that people don't always know they need help, right? And sometimes we need to be the ones to see something's happening, something's different, and when we're not physically there, it's difficult sometimes to and I don't want to say diagnose because we're not really diagnosing it. We're just knowing something's not right, and to try to offer them the assistance that they might need. So that's when go ahead.
Yeah, we do have a question here, and we have about 5 minutes left, so we'll see where the question goes, and where you want to take it after the question. So Lydia Stevens says, how are companies addressing the issue of additional charges an employee faces working from home, such as electricity, additional internet, for higher demands on bandwidth? Have you heard any feedback on that topic?
Yeah, a lot of them are actually paying for it, right? So we're starting to see, and I would say it might be more the larger companies right now, but we're starting to see where they're giving stipends, right? So, or they're saying, you know what, you can submit your cell phone bill and your internet bill and we'll pick it up. Now, they're not picking up your HBO, but they're going to pick up, the cost of the maybe an enhanced internet service because you can get the faster speeds. So they are looking, and different companies are doing different things, but I think they're aware of that, and they're rolling that out selectively, but they are rolling it out because they did realize that, especially if you have people that are servicing customers and they're not able to have a good connection, it's worth every penny for the company to step in and make sure that that's there. There are some that are doing office setups, right? So I'm going to give you $250 to do an office setup, whether that means buying the right chair or whatever, or $500, whatever it is, but they're giving that money and then just saying, this is for you to make sure that your environment is ergonomically set up. You have the right tools in front of you. So there are programs for that. And I think I mentioned earlier too, those states are starting to look at it to say, maybe there's an obligation for companies. So there could be states that actually enact some legislation that require, if somebody works from home for a certain amount of time, that the employer is on the hook for certain things. And I know the tax laws have changed recently too as to what can actually be claimed for work from home. I wouldn't be surprised if some of that is challenged as well.
Yes, there's a follow-up question. As an employee, any suggestions on how that topic might be raised to HR?
I think it's just important to raise it, right? So it's the worst thing that can happen is they can say no. Or I think you're probably going to hear, if it's not a yes, it's going to be, we're looking at that, because I think most companies are looking at it, because again, this was intended to be a short term and now it's looking longer. And I think as companies look at it and say, you know what, we might remain in a remote, or at least a hybrid remote, because it works for us. It's less of a footprint. They're saving money there. They're going to need to make sure that what they're doing works for the employee, it works for the employer, and it's also a fair from a legal perspective. So I think that there's a lot that are looking at it. But if it isn't, especially if it is a burden on an employee, I think there's nothing wrong with approaching it and saying, listen, this is what I need in order to make me more effective, right? Don't ever go up with it just complaining, this is really expensive. It's, in order to make me more effective, this is what I need. Is there an opportunity for the company to help me? And I think that's just a better conversation.
Yeah, that's some great questions, because that's I think the realities of what some folks are facing. We are running up just 3:30. Some folks might have meetings or anything after this. Nancy, can I suggest this last section, if the slides are going to be available, that folks can review those things on their own? I guess your contact information is there in the slide deck if they have any other questions.
Absolutely. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd be glad to talk to anybody offline. That would be great.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it was a very helpful conversation. Actually, a nice wind down to our day. We got into some pretty deep technical conversations today. So it was nice.
This is easier.
From the softer side, and very good tips. As a matter of fact, I just during the conversation, was rude on you a little bit. Typed a message off to someone on the team to start our team meeting a little bit earlier tomorrow. So we can have some chatter. So you've got a nice comment from Jay Scarfone saying excellent session, and thank you, Nancy. So I think we'll echo that from the group.
Great. Thank you. It was great to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. So just a couple of closing remarks here today. Thanks for everybody for attending. I hope you found it valuable, as always. And I want to thank all of our participants, both those on the committee and our guests that joined us today. I remind you that the presentations will be sent out and available. There's a little bit of a delay of a day or two until things from Zoom get consolidated for the video, but we'll get that back out to you. And any unanswered questions we'll circulate to our panelists and try to get that feedback as well. As always, a big thank you to our generous sponsors for helping make these events possible. A thank you to the IT committee, put a lot of work in this year, had a little bit of nerves on how we were going to pull it off virtually, and with the help of everybody on the committee and PAMIC, especially Brittany and Andrea, we were able to pull it all together. And one last note I just kind of wanted to share with the rest of you is with PAMIC. I think this is wonderful. The value of the PAMIC network for me, it strengthens the local insurance and IT communities. So I want to thank PAMIC for those connections and the opportunities for us to all work and learn together. We have another opportunity for learning together coming up on Thursday, November 12th, which is the Underwriting and Loss Prevention Seminar. So please encourage even yourself and other members in your company to attend that event. I looked at the agenda. It looks like it's going to be another great session. So with that, thank you all again. Have a wonderful day, great Friday, and nice weekend.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.